Okay, I did have to do
Morning, Richard.
Good morning.
Good
Morning, Rich.
Rich.
Going down this afternoon?
Yeah, I'm gonna leave shortly after lunch.
Rich, just so you know, I did have John make an alternate drawing for down here. You probably don't have that. Have you sent it out?
I did.
Yeah. There's an alternate drawing that we can send you later on.
Yeah, that'd be fine. It'd be a couple days for I get to take a look at it, but yeah, that'd be great.
I know Courtney doesn't have this, so I can't have her send it to you. I guess.
Okay.
But we'll send one to you later on.
He's got special privilege.
You got one. And you too.
Sarah's printing out a little bit.
Well.
Morning.
Things can change.
That's pretty common though, so.
Yeah, I think, well, over, as I told you, John, over the last couple of days, I've had a change of my mind.
Sure. Well, right now it's just ink on paper, so.
When I looked at logistics, it makes a lot of things change.
I'm already part of it.
Oh, okay.
I bet you didn't have coffee.
What? Our coffee pot broken.
Those donuts come.
Yeah.
I don't even know where they came from.
I think they were here from the open house. Like, I think they brought them in probably. 'cause-
Oh, that's kind of-
Yeah.
wish they had those right. No, if you're like me, leave anytime. This is nice.
It is.
Let's call this meeting to order. Let's do the pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, John has passed out that information here, and then there's also, when I reconfirmed things with John the other day, I had him draw up an option for down here and this area here, so that is the other John drawing. So, John, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, okay. Good morning,
It's
everybody.
like I'm gonna remind everybody, this is a fluid thing. We've kind of, a lot of things have changed.
Absolutely. So where we're at right now, I have an agenda that I put together, but really it's pretty straightforward, pretty basic. And we could spend as much time on this as you'd really like to this morning, talking over the information that's provided. But where we're at right now in the process, for practical purposes, we're really on the tail end of this assessment. We've got the actual written information put together after we had a chance to look over the building's physical conditions, and Tom and his group have had a chance to look at the HVAC systems, communication systems, electrical systems. We put together the written narrative of that assessment, and then also, as we were asked to do, we put together some really very schematic drawings in terms of where things could potentially, down the road eventually end up. With that regard, what we really wanted to try to do was know where things could eventually go and end up, so we could have a good idea of how to reconfigure potentially a few spaces on the main, we'll call it the first floor. The primary focus when we started the project was HVAC. So we discussed that a little bit in the past here with some of the preliminary information we have, and Tom is here to discuss that more and the direction you really want to go on that. A couple other items that were of concern is the room we're in right now, the supervisor's meeting room, bringing this up to speed to get it more usable, more user-friendly. So we tried to address that as well. Big picture item we had too was the treasurer's office. We know that that's really undersized right now. So we came up with this scheme to try to find some more room for the treasurer, and we laid out a quick schematic plan for what that could potentially look like after we've had some discussions with each department head. And then lastly, one of the focuses too was to try to bring things up to spec really in regards to the Americans with Disabilities Act. This building was built in 1964, 65, I believe. And with that said, the act wasn't around. That didn't come around until 1990. So 1991, maybe. Things are pretty close to ADA compliant. They're not all the way there 100%. So what we looked at was, how to arrange for better parking. The parking out front is very close to the front door, which is good, but it isn't necessarily as level as it probably should be according to the ADA Act. And front doors look good to me. I think they're operable. I don't see any issues there with the vestibule. But the other point too is the restrooms. Restrooms are really not, really up to speed from an ADA standpoint. So we looked at a potential layout for those restrooms. And as we discussed before, the number of occupants on each floor really dictates the number of restrooms you have to have in accordance with the building code and plumbing code. So where we landed was, I think you need right on the fringe of 2 or 3 fixtures in each room. But I would think that moving forward with the project and as things develop, we would be able to zero in a little bit better on exactly the size and shape of those new restrooms and, go from there. A lot of it depends on where a large meeting room ends up going. You have more occupants in a meeting room, which brings up the occupant count on each floor. So if you're sizing for an assembly room, you're sizing the restrooms a little bit bigger. If that assembly space is on another floor, then those restrooms could potentially shrink down a bit on that main floor. So another thing to be said about this particular project is, if it goes in phases and you're not doing the entire building at once, you don't have to bring every space up to code, building code wise. If we're not touching the courtrooms right now, we don't have to really, think about sprinklering the entire building, right away. So if we sort of limit the areas of construction, it doesn't immediately kick in all the code requirements for the building as it, in its entirety. So I would think moving forward with these projects or, this first phase, we could take a really hard look at the project and see exactly what needs to be done. There's also an interest in, keeping things in budget, reusing walls where we can, not demoing, as much as, we want to. If we can go back and save some walls, save some doors, things of that nature. That would certainly be the intent, to keep things within budget. And then lastly, we talked about last time as well, doing the HVAC project would require quite a bit of above ceiling work. So with that said, and we can discuss it more, but I think that would be phased going into spaces and replacing ceilings as HVAC systems are replaced. Some of the lighting is new LED fixtures. Those could potentially be taken down, stored, put back in, you know, after, so you're not losing those lights that were, you know, fairly recently put in. So really, we have a lot of things to kind of go over and discuss. All that's captured in the report. And guessing y'all had a chance to kind of read through that. And, you know, we gave you a draft of that, I think, a little while back as well. So in that report is our assessment of the building, and also just a real brief kind of cost summary of what we would think that the project would cost. Anything I'm missing on these?
No, and I can get into more details, obviously, with the HVAC scope and kind of walk you through that. And it's right here. Sure.
I got just a quick question. I know Jean yesterday had asked you to just real quickly pencil out having the meeting room on this level.
Right.
So and I'm looking at that, where would environmental health move to then? Or what would you suggest? Because I don't see that on here.
Right. So,
I can just interject there.
yeah, go ahead.
I mean, home care aid is probably not gonna move over. And probably VA is probably not gonna move over. So that being said, that opens up some space on this floor. So whether or not we want to go over in that corner with them or not, Gene and I talked a little bit about that too. So I think the biggest space that I see, and it depends upon how quickly the HVAC gets installed, but you know, right here where the you know where the boilers at, you know, that's
That could be a fill in there too.
really good and useful space.
The other thing is, I think everybody's got to remember, that if you go look at the cost of this thing, it's in the preliminaries, this isn't all gonna get done this year. It ain't gonna get done next year, probably not next following. It's gonna be a long road down the road. So this will be phased in, so some of the stuff will not happen for near term. So I think it's just a roadmap. You know, I think we're gonna be lucky. For this one, lucky with HVAC put in, get the treasurer's office, auditor switched. We need to, and I think the other thing we need to do is get very strong too, that supervisors have been living out of a suitcase long enough. Need to get something permanent. And that's why I kind of looked at things the way we were with the supervisor being up on that top floor, which I did like the idea of it, but it wasn't necessary. There's some positives to the whole site. But I think in order to get us to do this, we need to get down here. Dean and I looked yesterday, if we set this up right, we can probably utilize the east part of this where the sheriff is at. And let's say when we have to move, the auditor to move down here, we would only have one move. You know, so as the auditor's space is finished and the treasurer's moved, then we can do the treasure space and the auditor can move up. So we have less moves, so we can utilize that space for temporary housing of that office at this point. That's some of my thoughts.
John, I kind of cut you off there. So go ahead.
No, you jumped in at a perfect time. I was going to say the same thing you said. So, you know, really what you have to think of this is what is the primary goal of this first phase? We're not looking at doing the whole, like I mentioned before, the whole building isn't going to necessarily go under construction at one time. That's just not a possibility. It's not a reality at all right now. So primary goal again, treasure space, restrooms, ADA, and the board of supervisors space as well. So how do we get there? Well, I think the treasurer needs to obviously move to a new spot because you're landlocked to that corner that you're sort of in. You also have the restrooms and kind of in your space as well. So you can't find more room where you're at. So it would require, it would require a move for sure. So that's where we have the auditor flopping, kind of switching places with the treasurer. treasurer's office. And that treasurer's office, in order to grow and expand in space, would need to take over the old Board of Supervisors space. And there's a small mail room there as well. But that's kind of the first goal there. And then how do we get the Board of Supervisors space brought up to snuff, like Gene said? And we're looking at right now at a couple different options. One is on the first floor. The other option is sort of in this similar space where it's at, maybe taking over where the sheriff is moving out as well. So,
Can I throw out an idea?
Yeah.
Okay, so we meet once a week, and it seems like we meet every day now, but would it be feasible? I know on your report, page 4, you had said something about the recorder's office and doing more digital to create more
Right.
space, because I see down in the basement, let me think about this. You have 24 or 1,254 square feet for recorder storage. And that's a lot of space, and I do understand we've got a lot of records in this courthouse and a lot of stuff that can probably go away. But in that basement, there's also an open space of 1,056 feet
mhm.
down near the IT room. Would that ever be a potential to put the supervisor's room down there in the basement?
I think from a space
Knew you were gonna give me that
standpoint.
chagrin.
It's one of those things where it's a
I'm
public,
not looking at them.
Yeah. it really is a public meeting room. And
Okay.
as we mentioned,
I'm for
beyond
that.
beyond the border.
Oh, you are?
Get away, as far away from the public as possible.
Well, I'm just saying, because
Say that, I
then
didn't-
Go in the basement, have a meeting, and then come back out, right?
But
Well,
it could be,
yeah.
it could utilize as an EOC room as well. 'Cause it could
Yeah.
Be near
Yeah,
communications room.
right. Well, I would say the opportunity is really, there's a lot of space in the basement.
I'm not
Th-
saying, we
yeah,
weren't.
this-
I just wanted to throw it out there. I was just
Yeah.
running some ideas.
This being a public meeting space, and then also not just for the Board of Supervisors, but potentially being used by other departments.
Well, and
In the
that's,
building.
that's,
True, I
what
guess we were
Oh,
utilizing
Ken
it.
and I've had that discussion, that boardroom can be utilized for conference room, for a department.
Right.
I don't think we need to have a couple of conference rooms in this building. And they could utilize it for general meetings, as long as we're not having a meeting. Have that. I feel it could be used for multiple functions.
You know,
With a primary objective, of the supervisors, but it needs to be utilized for other things.
you know, in discussions and thoughts that I've had, I mean, it's really a tough decision to make, simply because there's pros and cons to everybody, whether it be supervisors and the and our relationship when we're here with the auditor, when we're not here, then you have relationships between every office on the main floor. And so that's really important too. This is really a tough decision to make, I think. I think there is no perfect way. And I think we just have to keep discussing it and hashing it out until we get there.
Right, yeah. Obviously, there is the next phase coming up, which is HVAC primarily, and then this work. There could be some more in-depth sort of studying and discussions, things of that nature, once we sort of wrap up this assessment portion of it. Right now, where we're at is we're discussing the information with you, and we want to make sure that we're on the right track with you before we say, here's your final information. And, you know, that we want to be sure we're understanding where everybody is coming from. We have things sort of dialed in correctly. The report looks right. We could also talk about the budget a little bit more, but yeah, this meeting right now, honestly, it's really tail end of the assessment. We still want to hear all these ideas, obviously, but I think too, moving forward into the next step, will give you an opportunity to kind of digest all this, really get a good idea in your minds exactly where these rooms want to end up, and then how the treasurer space wants to lay out, auditor space, how that wants to lay out, things of that nature, so.
The other thing to kind of keep in mind is that this is, when, as design professionals, when we kind of put these ideas together, that they're kind of like our dart in the wall in terms of, okay, well, this is a concept and there's going to be iteration. I think it's fairly safe to say within reason that you can move the parts around and the cost generally stays the same because we're kind of at this point kind of basing it more on a high level. And just as an FYI too, we had a real live test of this cost here just recently, the Cedar Falls City Hall remodel. 35,000 square foot building, about the same era, very similar scope, VRF system, full HVAC replacement was driving that project as well. And it came in pretty darn close. This 4.3 number, there's reasons this would be higher, but that number came in at 3.9 all in. And this one over here, and that's the construction cost, not all the soft costs. So that compares very well with that 4.3. So this number isn't, a lot of times as design professionals, we're just kind of doing this. This one, I feel, I don't know how you feel, but I look at this number and say, yeah, it's probably pretty spot on in this market.
Yeah, it's a tough thing for us to do too. And we try to use as real world numbers as we could based on.
We were just lucky to have that project bid here just to.
For me to lay these out, I always want it to come in on your budget. So there's that in the back of my mind, like, how do I get there? There's also the reality of the project. And once you get into the construction and bidding and all that, where you don't want that to be a surprise that it's so much higher than what you thought. So we kind of temper it on both levels. We try to get as real world as we possibly can.
Yeah.
And also we put in everything that we can think of that would need to be done to get this project finished, with maybe a few other things such as the roof. Maybe there's a couple other things, we had a pretty decent sized contingency in there. So we turned the dial up a little bit rather than trying to turn it down and sort of lead you astray, thinking, well, we're right on budget and that's fine.
I have a
So
question about the
Yeah,
costs.
sure.
So I'm just looking at the treasurer and the auditor. Why is the auditor so much more than the treasurer? Isn't there more space with the treasurer?
Did I switch those around?
I don't know. It just says I have 2260 and she has 1872.
I might have switched those around.
Oh,
My
okay. I just,
apologies.
But it's still pretty close.
well, they are,
You
but
know.
I just,
Yeah, what I'm saying is that I still can't, even if your office is 159, 120, I think that is still pretty high, I guess. I mean, I can see a lot more construction going on in the auditor, or the treasurer's office, simply because it's more space.
Yeah, I think my number's wrong there. I have 1,259 square feet right now instead of that 2260.
okay, that's,
Yeah, so that number would come down some. Yeah,
Question about, was it Cedar Falls? Is that what you said?
Yeah, Cedar Falls City Hall.
So that 3.9, was that totally HVAC or was that?
No, that included some
other
included
stuff like
that they did a very similar from a concept standpoint, taking a look at departments, right sizing departments, looking at adjacencies, going in. It included, I mean, the one thing you got to keep in mind is this type of HVAC project is very invasive. I mean, you will drop just virtually every ceiling in this building to do the work that they would need to do. And so it included that cost as well. And John included that cost in here as well too. I mean, it's just a very invasive type of project. The other thing that number included was multiple phases. Because they like you folks had the similar circumstance where they can't just vacate the whole building for 8 months or 10 months and let them have at it. So we had to design the project so it was done in 4 phases. Actually it was like 6 phases in the end. But so it's a pretty good comparison actually. From the standpoint of scope. Now, there are some things that are different with this project. For example, there's a much larger electrical component. The electrical distribution system in this building is well past its useful life. I mean, dangerously past its useful life. So you really need to just, when we do this work, in order to support the HVAC work, we have to replace all the gear as we go through the building. And that's
talking just the panels or?
Yeah, the panels, the feeders, the main gear that's sitting back in the record storage area. In the back of that area, there's a electrical room back there. So all that needs to get upgraded so that it's a little bit more modern gear, I guess, and up to snuff from a code standpoint.
So you're not talking like the regular wiring?
No, a lot of the stuff like the outlets, we'll put the panels back in similar spots. So we'll intercept. A lot of times what we do is we'll take the old panel boxes, we'll make it basically a splice box and splice all the old circuits to the new ones, put a cover over it, and then take them over to the new panel, so you have to repull everything. So there's ways we deal with that, but that's all factored in.
And you think that's a figure?
Yeah. I mean, I know it is because I just saw the bids. So, yeah.
That T-tip is on this floor.
Yeah.
It's down there.
Okay.
So, and you probably answered this question before, but can you through the this process of installing the HVAC, can you overlay that over the old system so that there's this minimal downtime? I guess I'm just thinking seasonally, I mean, this isn't going to be done overnight by any means.
Right.
So can we still be operating the old system while we're installing things?
So in other words, can we get on one foot without getting off the other type of thing?
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
is there a total break?
No.
When we start the new project,
Yeah.
You're
very fortunate that you can maintain that old system until the very end. So it would be a gradual taking stuff off the old system, putting it on the new system until you get to the last phase and you just get rid of the old system.
And you were talking about taking all the ceilings down, like even in this area here where you got suspended ceilings, you'd have to basically get I mean, suspended ceiling is nice because then they can kind of pick and choose where they need to. Right. Yeah. And so, but yeah, for the most part, like in all the areas where you have that 1x1 spline ceiling, that smaller stuff with little holes in it, that would all need to come down and get replaced with this type of ceiling. Like a grid ceiling or what you see over in the new jail.
Tom, I have a question for you.
Sure.
In that electrical bid, will we be operating off of the jail standby power, or will we have to keep a standby power situation just for the courthouse?
No, I think just based on what I saw in the drawings for the jail, that generator backs up the end product is going to back up, the new generator is going to back up the courthouse as well. In a limited way, you're not doing a complete building backup, but you're backing up certain parts and pieces.
Okay, that's my first question. Second is would it be beneficial to have us prioritize these plans? Obviously, I think HVAC is probably going to be top priority, and if you remove that, would it be better if we prioritized how we feel that it should go, whether like we would say the north half of the floor above where you're at should be the highest priority, and then maybe the south half of the floor that you're on now be the second priority? Because obviously there's a lot of things we're not going to have funds for, but the smaller things, I call them smaller things, the roof could be taken care of in our normal budgetary process. There's some little things that we could pick off without stepping out on the limb too far. It's just the thought I've had.
Well, I think, Rich, my thought, I think we could do that, but I think even on this level here, we wouldn't necessarily have to do the whole south half, to just do this quarter. back here in this corner. And
Well, it might be advantageous to do it like a half at a time, but I think the hallways is where the most expense of removal of the ceiling, the asbestos, the abatement, all that kind of stuff that goes with it. Once you dig into it, you don't want to tap into it. You want to do the whole piece at once, bite the bullet and get it over with.
I think the hallways, they're gonna have to be done regardless.
Yeah.
Well, no. Yep.
But I don't know that we would change any of the hallways exterior walls. except for
Well,
the-
we would give John a clear path of, we want to do the whole half. And that would include, like on the floor you're on, that would include landing juvenile in a spot. And that's another side note that John, and I wish you would double back on that. Would you visit with juvenile court? Because I believe that they have to take urine samples, and that bathroom facility down in the corner might be intriguing to maybe look at, maybe moving her there. I just, it's just a thought that came through to me, and I have a little concern. I think she wants to probably keep eye on people, but if you could double back with her a little bit and find out that operation to make sure we're not causing an issue for her. And then, but yeah, I think it would be easier for him to say, well, I'm going to put environmental services here, going to redo a room here for a possible board. We're moving juvenile services. We could do the whole half. And then when you take the ceiling apart and when the HVAC goes in, it can all be done and not have to be some of that ground recovered. Yeah, you know, the HVAC, yeah, we can put it in and leave the structure just like it is. But then when we do the remodel, then we've got to move everything that we just moved maybe 12 months ago or 6 months ago.
My understanding with this type of HVAC.
Yeah.
We, this is able to move and splice in very easily, right?
Yeah, relatively so. I mean, the benefit of a VRF system is a minimal amount of ductwork you have to deal with, which makes it ideal for a building that's constructed like this, because you're not trying to put a lot of ductwork where you don't have space.
So if we would put a duct or a unit in a certain area, and then down the road we decide to change it, that could be moved around fairly easy.
Yeah, and the key for us when we're designing it is to understand what the end state needs to be. Because we don't want to put in equipment that is designed for today, and then 3 years down the road, you do a remodel and all of a sudden it's not the right size. You want to put the right size in now, even though it may not be ideal for today. It'll take care of you in the future. So you have to kind of look. That's why this planning process that John's going through and the discussion we're having is so important. Because even if you're only gonna, at the end of the day, want to spend 3.9 million, say for example, versus 4.8, you still need to kind of design the 4.8 so we know on the HVAC side what we need the plans for. So at the end of the day, you still end up you still have to go through at least part of that design process, because we don't want to do the HVAC upgrade in a vacuum, because what will end up happening is then you'll end up being disappointed when you decide to do something and then the system wasn't laid out in a way that can take care of that situation. So,
and also your lighting is going to be based in each room off of where the HVAC units wind up exhausting at. The length of those runs are going to change. So you want to do as many of them correct the first time as you can. It adds up fast.
yeah. And so it's just, that's part of the planning process. You know, in our next step, you know, a lot of times what we do in a project, like I'm working on a project right now for a school district, which is very similar in scope. HVAC upgrade, kind of being funded through the ESSER, which is the K through 12 version of the COVID money. And we're trying to think about as much as we can in terms of other improvements that will be made in the future. So as we lay the system out, we're designing it once, you know. And then what they did is they built in alternates. So you design the thing and then you still bid it.
and you see if some of these improvements, you know, you may come in, you know, we've had some pretty good luck here lately in some publicly bid projects where we've had projects come in at or below budget, which was a little unexpected, to be honest with you, with all the issues that we have with labor and supply chain, but a pleasant surprise. And so, you know, if you have those designed and then the market conditions are favorable and you're able to get those favorable numbers in, then you can at least bite off more. And if you can't, then at least you have it designed, you can rebid that part later. And that's kind of a strategy I know we've been using in a lot of these type of projects, especially the ones that involve these ESSER or American Relief Act funded HVAC improvements.
Just a general question that I have, you know, according to the timeline, this is our last meeting.
Correct.
So, you know, when we're talking about not figured out yet. What happens going forward? Can we kind of share more design work or?
Well, like I said, this is reviewing the draft right now, and I didn't want to call this the final. This could be the last in-house meeting we all sort of have together with us present and answer a lot of questions and determine direction that we want to go with this assessment, things of that nature. But I'm still willing to work on the assessment more before we do a final on it, if that answers the question. So I think we're getting pretty close. I don't think we're all the way there yet. Brought up a few good points. Actually, you know, this morning, and we're looking for options right now on the boardroom, you know, sort of where that might shake out eventually. So there's a little bit more to do. So to answer your question, last meeting here, but we're not done yet. And then we're presuming that presuming that we're going to move into the next phase with the HVAC. And with that being a project, we could really dial in based on this assessment with, you know, what that next phase would you know, entail realistically.
Well, then let me throw some more questions in.
Sure.
I'm not done.
Yep.
Never done. If we move the boardroom down this floor.
Before you start there, Gene, I have one more question about as far as the timeline and the so when are you going to tell us when this is it? This is what you paid for. This is the.
That's.
I mean, I think we kind of, we should kind of know that. I mean,
Yeah.
at least have a general idea of what that is.
When do we draw the line?
When-
Instead of you
yeah,
call
when-
next week and say we're done, you hit your 30,000 or whatever.
Well, with SEH, that's not necessarily our approach. We're not just going to say we're done. We're going to work with you. I think we're ready to do one more round on this and get to the final, you know.
So will your deliverable be able to go out for quotes for electrical and HVAC? No.
No, this is just the assessment. This is kind of a
The concept.
Yeah, concept. Then the next phase would be to actually, okay, well, this is in general the scope we're agreeing to go forward with. Then you hire us to do the actual construction documents, you know, the big set of plans, like they're sitting there that go out for bid.
Okay, that's what we need to know.
Yeah. So wrapping up the assessment is, you know, what we intend to do here in the next however long, you know, what it takes.
And you know, keep in mind too, that you don't feel like you have to have it completely 100% figured out, you know, as part of this phase, because that's part of what the design phase is for.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, because there's when you start digging into stuff, and when we start doing a lot of our like we did a good, you know, a pretty extensive walkthrough of the facility and a pretty deep dive. But when we start doing our documents, it's a lot more invasive. We're going to be looking above every ceiling. We're going to be measuring things. We're going to be really starting to kind of figure stuff out. And during that process is when you start finding out that, oh, we didn't know this condition was sitting above that ceiling. You know, that impacts this plan. So then we'll have to come back and say, hey, you know, we can't do this now because of this. What if we did this? You know, but you can't get to that until you start actually developing the construction documents. So that's kind of how the process works. It's kind of a, you know, I used to teach construction engineering up at Iowa State. And one of the things I told my students is that, you know, a lot of times in construction, you know, the process is pretty linear. you gotta pour the concrete foundations before you can pour the floor, before you can build the shell, all that with design. So that's construction. Design is like this. And that's just the reality of how design progresses. It's a very iterative, 2 steps forward, 1 step back type of process. Because there is a lot of discovery that goes on. There's real people, you guys all have opinions. That all needs to get into the mix, and that's how we kind of work through the process. But that's part of the design. The assessment just gives you a high level of, hey, in general, this is the concept, and in general, this is about how much it's going to cost.
Right. And then with that said, the numbers that we had in this report for a budget, I look at it as a budget, not necessarily an estimate so much, because right now we're not really estimating the exact.
We're doing a square foot area.
We're doing a square foot, just
using
sort of
historical
analysis.
numbers.
So this gets you a rough idea, what if. Get you the ballpark anyway, so to speak. But what we do in the design process moving forward is tell us what you want to do here, where you want this number to sort of end up, and that's where we can, when Tom showed you that. So that's what we do to sort of help sort out, well, this is what we can do for the price that you want to be at.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you figure out, hey, this is a number that we can spend, and we say, okay, well, then what, these are the priorities, and that's our job to kind of design within that parameter.
Do you guys think you can cover in all the asbestos that could be hiding?
I didn't.
We didn't. We recommended a company that does that testing and reporting. So
Did you foresee a surprise there or on a project scope like this?
I've done a number of projects with the military, and every project they do requires you to do a full report, full abatement before the project even really gets started. So I've watched that happen quite a few times. The reports are usually pretty thorough, and it's hard to really miss something unless the person doing the report physically can't get there and see it. So that's where there's sort of that what if you get above a ceiling and there's a pipe with asbestos on it, the person that did the report can't see that. So
there is going to be pipes above the ceiling that have asbestos. So I don't have to be an asbestos expert to tell you that's what's going to happen.
So does that mean there's pipes everywhere all over the place? No. I've seen enough projects where whatever you get on an asbestos, abatement bid to do it, it's not going to move much more than, and I'm throwing this out there just for 10% maybe, it's not going to double or triple or whatever.
Well, in the case that you would be able to remove those to the end of the project.
Some of them you take as you go. I mean, like so say you're going to do
as part of the heating system fluid.
Yeah. So usually where you find asbestos in the heating and cooling system is in the insulation, particularly in the elbows. Usually the straight runs are just fiberglass, but the elbows they used asbestos for a lot of those. And unless that's been previously abated, which I doubt out in the field, as they go through each phase, drop the ceiling, then the next step would be to have an asbestos remediation contractor come in, remediate those spots that are hot, and then the contractor can come in and do the rest of the demo. So, yeah.
All right, now back to what I was going to test. If we would move that boardroom down, that does change the sizing of the restrooms on both floors then? Would we be able to get by with what we have currently? No, and number two, do we need to have separate bathrooms, or should we just go with
Unisex.
unisex? And just to go down the road further, I don't even want to say it, but get into transgender. That's going to face us someday down the road. Because I know it's public school system that had restrooms put in, that's within 50 miles. Of the road that installed for transgender.
Sure.
So by going unisex, would that eliminate that issue?
The mechanical, I think the mechanical code really dictates the number of fixtures you need. And then the code also says right now, like it says you need one for men, one for women. I think you could also add a third restroom.
No way,
potentially.
I'm trying to eliminate.
Trying to eliminate that, I understand. We could look at it a little differently as the building as a whole. Maybe Dennis is the person that knows a little bit more about the plumbing requirements, but I've worked on several buildings in the past where as soon as you hit the number of fixtures required for the entire building, you're good for the whole building. And then if you want to add another restroom anywhere you want, you can do that. But so long you could have, let's say, and I'm just throwing this out, you could have 6 fixtures up on the first floor each for the whole building. And so long as you have an elevator that gets people there and stairs that get people there, you're good. Think of a football stadium. You have a huge number of people and you have restrooms kind of all over. You know, so long as you hit a fixture count, you're good, no matter how far somebody has to walk from the top tier all the way down and sort of get there. So that's looking at it sort of abstractly. Now, what's nice is to sort of disperse the restrooms around the building. If you need 6 fixtures, you do 2, you know, you're good. So there's that line of thought. But to try to answer your question, I think it makes sense to split them up per floor, sort of where you need them. We talked about maybe adding a couple in the break room, and that could take care of a lot of the staff's need. So the public restrooms then would be the question: how many public restrooms do you need each floor? So we'd have to take a look at it from a whole building standpoint. When we were just concentrating on this first floor, it was a little simpler to just look at one restroom or one pair of restrooms and say, well, there we need 2 or 3, and we could really dial that in once we get there. If we start looking at the whole building, then we have to start considering, well, we're going to start remodeling 2 or 3 different groups of restrooms instead of just one, and so the price starts potentially going up. So good question. The way I was looking at the restroom on the first floor was that's a great opportunity because you're handling the large assembly, meeting room as well with those restrooms there. Now, if this moves down to the first floor, you still might be okay on the count, but the restrooms would be on the upper floor, not so much right here for the assembly room. So it's a way of looking at it differently, I suppose, but let's say you had a meeting here. People needed to use the restroom, they could come use these. If they're full, then you can go upstairs, and it's just as simple as that. So you need to remodel these right now? Maybe not, but you would need an ADA restroom in the building, so that could be up on the first floor. So
We did talk at one time about having employee bathroom versus the public.
Yeah.
And as somebody that's here all the time.
Doesn't it? It kind of shows that.
it does show it in this plan, yeah.
This one,
Yeah.
that moving that room down here and then having a staff break room, so that employees can have their own bathroom. But what would go up then on the first floor if we move the supervisor down? Would we move?
It might drop down to just 2 fixtures required on that floor potentially, rather than the 3 that I think. But again, we'd have to really, it's one of those things where once we know where it's really desired to have the meeting room, we could take another look at it again and just make sure we have the fixture count.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I'm trying to avoid us getting overdone in some areas.
Right.
And
So-
I just thought that this unisex thing, I mean, over in Europe, that's the big thing
Right.
over there.
Yeah.
It would be a way to, I thought possibly have the trend.
Nothing would prevent you from just adding one, just to have it.
A lot of times people add family bathrooms just for that purpose. We just call it family.
Sometimes in office
No.
buildings, people want their own private restroom in their executive office space. So
And I will tell you, just, because it always comes back to money. Plumbing is some of the most expensive dollars you can spend. So especially in a building like
Well, that's why I was throwing it.
Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of the question that I had is moving from the bathrooms that we have today and making them ADA compliant doesn't necessarily mean we have to move fixtures. I mean, can you take this wall and just move it and minimally move, fixtures?
there's a good potential that
You know, because basically what you have to have is a door that's wide enough and be able to maneuver a wheelchair in that space.
Mhm.
So it's mostly, it looks to me like a lot of it is just,
And a lot of that's
Space
gonna come down to
wise.
final design.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
just creating more space and by moving a wall, not necessarily moving fixtures.
I've seen spaces, for a single user restroom, I think the smallest you can get to is 7 foot by 7 foot, so. That's a one person. Once you start getting into having stalls inside the restroom, that's where you really start to chew up space. And then also another thing to think about is just sight lines into the restroom from the corridor, things that like, usually you want to drop a wall in to kind of block sight lines. And once you start doing some of those things, the rooms just start getting bigger. They just do. And that's just what I've found. But this one on the first floor gives you a really good idea of what a 3 fixture ADA size restroom would be. And I think that right now we have it at 260 square feet for 2, and that includes all the wall space and everything. So 130 square feet each, that's for a 3 stall, 3 fixture restroom. 130 square feet in actuality, it's not that big of a space. If you walked into that room after it was built, you'd say, wow, this is kind of tight. This is really, and this is getting down to the bare minimums of space requirements. So could it get bigger, give more room? Sure could. But I tried to sneak it down as small as possible. And then it sure looks like, just from looking at the plans, the restroom spaces you have right here, I don't know how many fixtures are in each, but they look very similar in size. So could they be reconfigured to accommodate? Probably. It looks like there's a large chase space right there. I don't know, Tom, if we really know what's in that chase right now, but sometimes maybe you can capture that space back and use it. Maybe there's ducts in there, I guess we don't.
Show me.
So on this floor, this restroom right here,
Yeah.
could be beams or something, just
Is that
kind
the
of
wet wall?
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's a wet wall, then you really can't mess with it too much. So.
Yeah, and it looks like there's a beam line running through there, so sometimes that's kind of a no-fly zone in a restroom too. You can't put plumbing in there, so we really have to get in and take a hard look at it once we know really the bigger picture, question.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying, that the next step when you get into design, you're spending a lot of time just really poking around and trying to figure that stuff out. So.
But backing up to answer your question, I think this 216 square feet that you have sure looks like you could probably get 2 fixtures in each and make it ADA compliant without too drastic of a change, and maybe just moving one wall like you mentioned. That's probably doable. So could be something like 2 fixtures and then 1 sink, and that would be what you'd be able to fit in these rooms here.
So if we move the border and down from this plan down to this floor, would then the assessor then go back up on the main floor?
Yeah, I think we have to look at it that right now the assessor is not necessarily moving in this first phase. Yeah.
So then basically the south half of that floor above us would
Should stay the same.
Right.
there would be some cost savings there.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah, potentially. This captures really what I perceived as being this first phase of work only. So I don't know that and we talked about it a little bit in the past too. If we start moving these 2, auditor and treasurer, it's nice because you're sort of swapping spaces. So you're not having to move somebody out and start doing kind of a whole domino effect. So talked about that in the past. If you do want to do more than a couple spaces, usually what you do is find a space, let's say like the sheriff's office, or hate to say it, but like the jail, that could be cleaned out completely. New carpet, new paint, new ceilings, kind of a jail wouldn't be a low cost renovation. Let's say the sheriff's office, new carpet, paint. Then you can start moving departments into that temporarily while their space is being reconfigured or redone and somebody else moves into it. And then So there's a whole sort of swapping around.
So we talked last time, or maybe it was when Gene and I met with you, that
Mhm.
ideally you'd have me move out, get that space done, and have the treasurer move in once the space was done. So they only have to move one time.
Right.
And then where would I go? I mean,
Meetings has a work trailer that we can probably get.
That's why I think
Got a nice parking lot for you too.
if we would make.
Just
this
kidding,
board-
Courtney.
Carroll,
The boardroom down here, and if we could set that up temporary over here for you,
Mhm.
we'd only have, actually, if we did it that way, we'd only have one move. Be your office, and then maybe she would move in when you get done, and when you got renovated, or then you do your final move. So in this phase, there'd only be one offset. It'd be temporary, and what I would suggest that we get the boardroom set up pretty well the way we want it, and we could, the way I looked at it, I thought about that yesterday. We could put a temporary wall in there, so if we could keep the meeting separate from your office. And then eventually take that out and then utilize that for the whole thing. We don't have to have that whole thing set up right away. But I want to get to the point that the main infrastructure or the grits of the room is done, so we can function normally.
Yeah,
The old,
obviously, we're working in this space right now, and we have been for how long? So even if we went all the way to the wall, the outside wall, it'd be far bigger than what we have right now. And if you actually require to have that space as well, I mean, we could certainly work something out there. I agree with Gene on that.
I think we could set up the boardroom and overly set it up and put a temporary wall in it.
Yeah.
but she would have access to the old sheriff's office too. I mean, that space there also.
Yeah,
That's what we're talking
about, Rich.
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, we can certainly make all that work for her. As long as she don't have to go through an election, that's probably her worst time when she has the most foot traffic, but.
Why don't you go through an election and she'll have to probably utilize our office.
Space down here.
So unfortunately, you're the one that's gonna get moved on.
sounds like I'll move
So
twice down here and then back upstairs.
But and as far as I see, if that's the case, if we're just doing a two north rooms or offices up there. I mean, and I think that we need to take a look at the curtain system that's in there for the front. And I think maybe look at that counter system and maybe make it some spot in all those departments that's handicapped accessible. Now, saying that, does that have to be in the counter, or could that be that they can come around the back side?
Yeah. Another good question. I have seen the high-low counter, which was very common right when ADA came out in the 90s. It was just a quick reaction to that. Without the 30 years now of experience that we've had sort of working with it. So I've done a lot of branch bank work back in the early 2000s where the main teller counter did not have the high-low. It had a higher counter that was you could reach over, but it also had a lower lip out in front of the counter that was 12 inches deep that somebody could write on. That was at 36 inches high. So you had the dual height counter. You satisfied all of the ADA requirements to the letter, and you did it in a way that was reasonable as well. You know, it wasn't you were putting somebody sort of
That makes a lot of
yeah,
sense.
yeah. So can you do it? Yeah, you can do it without having the high lows. I prefer it that way personally. I think it's if you do the high low, sometimes there's a low that doesn't hardly ever get utilized. Where if you do and that's at a branch bank where they liked the higher portion just so that nobody can see them doing whatever they were doing. I think in the sense of a counter that's only, let's say 36 inches high, you could do a lower portion at 30. So it's not really that kind of extreme.
So do a front to back, not
difference.
side to side.
Yeah, the front counter is 12 inches deep, 30 inches high, and then the main counter for somebody standing on the other side is at 36. Or I've also seen them go as high as 42 now, where a teller wants to sit on a stool. So it's easier to get in, and away from, but for the most part, you're sitting on and I just did a project over at the, can't recall, county clerk's office in Omaha, Douglas County, where we did just that. We have the 42-inch high counter for stool height, and then we have the 30-inch counter. Actually, I think that we had that, they decided they wanted to go with the high-low then. That's what they wanted to do. So, but I can tell you, the high-low kind of setup, it works, but I don't think it's 100% necessary to sort of have that. And I also think the water coolers were used to not just have one water cooler, you had to have two, and all that. 2010 came around and kind of updated the ADA and kind of made it a little bit more reasonable. Not in the effect that they were unreasonable to start, but the way the thing was written had some consequences that they didn't really, intend. So they rewrote some things in 2010 and gave a little bit more flexibility to what you can do. So I think now the bottle filler cooler might be something that could be used for filling cups and things of that nature. So I think there's a little bit more flexibility these days.
What was your question?
I just wanted to verify something. Is scanning part of the cost of this? Or-
Sounds good.
Because like, if it's not, that storage unit for the recorder is very small. If it is, that's fine. That's fine. I just wanted to make sure that's part of it because that's not enough storage unless the books are scanned.
And Courtney and I have had a discussion, I think. maybe
I have been
follow
working on quotes and the other one, he said it'd be. after
I think
Thanksgiving,
that should be brought to the top of the priority.
Okay.
Your office and Courtney's office, that we do some scanning and get rid of some of those records.
Let me verify. So the storage on the first floor is too small, or even, are you saying the basement floor is too small
The
as well?
basement is fine. I mean, if we're adding more to the basement, to scan them. I don't
Okay.
know.
So you're just saying on the
Yeah.
first floor? that
Yeah,
one.
we're not
And I'm not so
scanning
sure some of that down the
extra.
basement in the bench. That's
Or
something we
use
got
for
to get
something
answers.
else.
Well,
Or GIS could come into the VA room.
your vault's not changing.
Oh, I just found this plan.
Yeah.
Well, that's because
yeah.
they were moving the boardroom in there. But if
Are
they
we not
don't-
doing that? I didn't. Okay, I'm
I
sorry.
don't know that we will be anymore.
This is kind of a long
Yeah,
term.
I'm gonna tell you the reason I came with this. If we do this, we can get if we're gonna do that upstairs for the treasurer's office, that eliminates us for a boardroom. So if there is anything done, we ain't gonna have a place to have our meetings. That eliminates any public meeting. So I think if we do anything right now, my thought is, if we do something, this needs to get somewhat modified for a board first. That we can be meeting upstairs while we're still doing the rest of the plans and designs. Once this is done, then they can start doing the renovation for the treasures, and Courtney could be down here. And then after that, the treasurer's off, the treasurer moves over there, and then we do the renovation for the
Those
auditor's
two are
office.
swapping and the other two are just gonna stay. I know this.
For now, the other two are gonna stay, I think. That's fine.
No, that's fine. I
I'm
just
one
wanted
of
to,
five.
I was just looking at this plan. I didn't, like, long term.
I mean, to me, it looks like logistically, that makes more sense. Because if you look at these figures, we're not gonna be able to do all this. This is gonna be a long road.
I agree that. It's more sort of-
And the other thing is, if your two officers stay, all we gotta do is work in the ceiling. So we probably just gotta do the counterpart, the screen area or
I agree.
whatever. Just maybe some painting and something. So that will keep the cost down on that.
I think that
There's probably gonna be a point when you guys are gonna have to move. When they do that construction. I would
How long
have-
does
I
that
would
take?
guess- I would guess that would have to happen.
How long does
right?
that take in the ceiling? I mean, is it,
Let me know what you think too, Tom. I've seen it recently happen and it was in an occupied space. What the contractor elected to do was do it after hours in the evening, weekends, things of that nature. I don't know if that's a reality with as much work as potentially could be happening. The cost goes up to do that, so.
Typically, we move people out. I mean, like the Cedar Falls thing was all done predicated on actually relocating people, swinging you into an occupied space temporarily. And and then redoing, because it's pretty invasive.
Well, I was just
So
thinking,
how-
even
how many
if we
days would
moved
that
it, yeah.
If you moved it at all, I mean,
Uh,
that's not much space, but I mean, that might have
Well,
to be the case.
But then moving computers and everything, what if we just, I mean, if it only takes one day, if they could get it done in
Oh,
one
no.
day, our office would just be
No,
closed and. No.
We're not even close to the right time scale.
Okay.
So like,
You're looking at, if we did this 4x4, say, for example, 4 phases, you would probably shut down a floor for at least a couple of months.
Well, but
Whoa.
Well,
And then
that's a good
other
thing I brought
areas-
that up, because we have to have that discussion as
Well, I thought
well.
you'd be just open pipes through and just have dropped that.
No, part of the problem is the demolition, is that you gotta get rid of the old stuff. You don't wanna
If
just,
you're in the right season, you can't do that until afterwards.
no, I mean, you can, depending on how you phase it, you can do it whenever. I mean, this system wouldn't prevent us from doing it in the winter.
What would be from your perspective, a order of progression moving through the building to do the HVAC, get that going?
Well, from a logic standpoint, and assuming we would do Dennis's concept of independent rooftop, like package rooftop style ERVs, we would probably go from bottom to top, I guess. So be the logical progression.
Well, I can see this floor completely shut down.
Yeah.
So this would be your first, this would be an
Yeah.
ideal first floor.
And just do what, and that'll give us a pretty good idea of what we're gonna be facing.
I don't know if this matters or not, but starting at the bottom too. Some of the spaces don't have ceilings and maybe some don't need them put back. I know the
That'd be
comm
done.
center, the comm center would, environmental health would need ceilings, but, and corridor as well, but there could be a lot of space down there where we don't necessarily put ceilings back in as well. So I don't know if that speeds that up a little bit, but, I could see you redoing a space on this floor for a flex space to move people into temporarily. I don't know if everybody has their own computer, or if you could set up a bank of computers people can sort of work with. I think that there's a window, sort of set that up as a temporary, just kind of catch all space for people to move into temporarily. That's sort of the best kind of least path of resistance.
So I mean, is this something that you could toss up as far as, say you go through that whole process of moving Courtney down here, you got this already done. And then you start at the treasurer's office and you just work around. And say the assessors could move in with the recorder
Mhm.
for a period of time,
Yeah, yeah.
you just squeeze together, but
there's gonna be growing pains no matter how you do this.
Well, I know, as far as-
Yeah,
as far as
so
the computer,
there has.
I just had the thought.
Yeah.
Let's close the
couldn't we
courthouse.
get some
Yeah.
laptop
You can.
and do
No.
what?
So
that
to-
might be the best.
just as an
because
example,
for-
like in Cedar
Just get some
Falls,
laptops for that apartment and they can use them for temporary, use wireless.
I'd say check with IT and find out what the best solution is. Because we
Oh,
all
I
log
just-
into our computers.
But I didn't realize you,
Maybe.
so if that upper floor, you can shut that whole area up there.
and you don't have, so to give you an example, Cedar Falls City Hall, 2 stories, but there are 2 wings. So the ideal way we look at it was 4 quadrants, do 4 phases. Well, once we dug into it with all the departments, logistically, we couldn't shut down some areas like that. And so we ended up with a compromise, which was a 6-phase approach, where we did maybe a partial area. So yeah, like when you get to the top floor in the courtrooms, that's gonna be multiple phases. You just can't shut.
Well, the courtroom too, I don't know if you have to get above the ceiling in the courtroom or if you sidewall the courtroom.
You can, a lot of the existing HVAC, if I remember right, uses soffits and ductwork, and that kind of condition, we can reuse that ductwork and not even have to get.
Maybe don't take it to courtroom, it's closing down for 2 months.
Again, this is where I'm talking about, this is when we're getting into the weeds and trying to figure it out. It's like, what's the least invasive way to do this? in this particular space. And then we start analyzing that. Oh, there's existing ductwork in this office. We can reuse that.
Right.
Avoid getting into the ceiling in the courtrooms, put everything out in the corridors. Simple.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
and so that's the kind of thought process we go through. So I didn't mean to scare you guys with that number, but the general pat number, it's just like, yeah, you know, 6 to 8 weeks is probably pretty reasonable for the type of work they're doing.
Everybody's had remodeling jobs in their house.
Yeah.
We know how dirty they get. We even try to minimize that as much as possible. You know, I can't imagine having
Oh, I just
computers
figured
sitting
after
out
that.
on the desk,
My wife
thinking that that's a good thing, you know, when they're.
The
Creating all this
benefit
above.
of that is that a lot of it's lay-in ceilings in departments. Your point is right, is correct. All that would need to be taken off, put away.
I mean, they have
Things would
scaffolding
be-
set up. You need everything down.
Things would be, everything would be covered in plastic.
But it's not ladders covered or ladders around, or would it be scaffolding?
I would imagine ladders for that sort of thing. I think a demo crew could come in and pop a ceiling out in a couple of days. I think the real work is coming back and
Yeah, those guys, you've seen the ceiling guys, they're on the stilts.
yeah.
Yeah, that's how they do it. I mean, they don't even get ladders, they just still
So
walk
would
around in
you,
those things.
would you have your demo work as far as if you were gonna take this wall out for the boardroom? Would you have all that done before you did the HVAC project?
It'd be it goes part and parcel to it. The way they do it, I mean, the general contractor would sit down and they'd work out a phasing schedule for that particular thing. And it's kind of like when I drew that thing up about how construction tends to be more of a linear process. And I taught this, I specifically taught construction scheduling up at Iowa State. And so there is a very defined process that you go through to kind of figure out how all those parts and pieces go together and how the different trades work and how you minimize wasted time. So they would go through that. And that's something I'm sure when we put the bid package out, we would request detailed schedules for each phase.
I put together phases that I put into bid packages.
Yeah.
You found out I was way off. And it was a schedule that was put together as a group consensus, but contractor comes back and says, well, I think if you do it this way, this way, this way, it's gonna be a shorter duration. You could save X amount of dollars, things of that nature. So I think if we're starting out with floors being redone, I think we big picture decide we want to start in the basement, ground floor, first floor, put that in the bid package. If that's what makes most sense, sense. And then let
This
the
is the
contractor.
floor that's gonna be completely empty.
Yeah, right. So,
But if they get this done, people could be counting.
right.
Yeah, you guys have a good situation.
You do.
doing that.
We have some vacant
Yes,
Yeah.
you have a great
space.
situation.
And so it really, this is kind of a blessing for you guys because when you do get into it, start doing the phasing, you're gonna find that swinging people in departments is gonna be a lot less catastrophic than
Right.
in another situation.
And you have a lot of good access out of the building into the building separate. So you have a lot going for you. So it's not all, it's just a matter of deciding what makes, and obviously we've gotten there, what rooms really need to be renovated. HVAC, things of that
Right,
nature.
right.
We could start coming down this list and potentially start crossing some things off. Like Rich had mentioned, maybe cross off the roof if that's done separately, or if we don't do rooftop, if we do ground mount, I don't know if that's still.
And then that cellular roof, well, roof mounted equipment, like a package rooftop unit is gonna be the cheapest solution.
I
So-
understand that, but I guess my concern too then is be putting stuff up there. If we're gonna look at down the road 5-10 years to replace that roof, then we gotta remove that stuff, put it back on.
Oh, no, you don't have to touch it again.
Okay,
They'll work around that.
okay.
Yeah,
That was my
usually-
concern. I'm like, oh, I don't wanna
Usually
add
up
something
on,
there. We do
How much work gets done in the penthouse?
The penthouse, eventually, I don't know, our way of thinking is we won't even need the penthouse anymore. There's really no value for it. It's kind of a goofy penthouse the way they built it. to be honest.
And the roof is
I know I like
concrete.
calling it the penthouse.
I mean, that'd be an awesome boardroom when you put a skylight.
Right.
It ain't high enough.
Oh,
Well, the roof on that, I think, is concrete, cast concrete as well. So it's not, if you want to take equipment out, sometimes you pop the roof off, you pop some of the metal
Yeah, it's
deck
just-
on, you take it out with a crane or whatever. This one, I don't think you have that luxury. So I think it'd be removing some louvers or brick or whatever, taking things out.
So there's and again, I know you guys don't go up on the roof regularly, but if you look over on the jail building, there's a big piece of equipment that's sitting up there. That's the size and type of equipment we put on this roof, because what it does, it's called an ERV or it's called a DOAS, a dedicated outdoor air system. And that's what provides the ventilation air through the whole building. So you'd have a piece of equipment that would look like that. And you'd have a bunch of other smaller pieces of heat rejection. So what you get rid of at the end of the day is the boiler. And so really the boiler room becomes vacant space. And we've talked about that. And the other thing you get rid of is that chiller sitting out by the front entrance to the right.
And these go away too, right?
Yep.
The radiators go away.
They go away.
Yeah, radiators go away. You don't have those anymore.
So would you use the existing chase then for air handling?
You probably would, and that's the reason, see, so all the air, all that ventilation duct comes down from top to bottom, and that's the reason starting at the bottom makes sense. Because you can, the hard thing is gonna be finding a route for that new duct work down, but the existing system, you know, the getting off 1 foot before you get on the other thing, you wanna start at the bottom so you're peeling back the old system as you're moving up through the building. Ideally, there's ways to work around that if it doesn't work from a phasing standpoint, but that's ideal from a mechanical standpoint.
Yeah, I can see where it would take 2 months, and I don't even know if it would take longer, because if we're doing, getting off 1 foot and going on the other, because that has to work with, I mean, with where, you know, going through all these offices.
Yeah, putting each one online.
Yeah.
So does the corridor work get done and then it branches, or is that not the correct way of thinking? Does it, the whole floor kind of?
Yeah, I mean, the ventilation duct, you have it, and you know, the beauty about this type of system is that you're not talking like ginormous pieces of ductwork, because you're only talking ventilation air, which is, you know, a relatively small amount of air compared to what you need to heat and cool the space. So that ventilation duct ends up in, the trunks aren't very big. So what you do is you take a trunk on per floor, you probably come down a central point, branch out, go through the corridors, and then duct in to wherever the VRF units are, because that's where you're trying to get the ventilation air into. And then, you know, and as we look at the phasing, and as we look at where the units go, we may end up putting a lot of those units out in the corridor. In some cases we'll put them in the space. The beauty about this system is that the units themselves, it's a very quiet system. I mean, we're seeing a lot more of it used in offices and schools because of how quiet it is. So you can have the equipment right in the room, and it's very, very quiet, very silent, because all the compressors are located remotely.
That's what we have over there.
Correct. Yeah, you'll see all the cassettes and stuff in the ceiling. That's exactly the same type of system. Yeah, if you remember the discussion, the reason we were kind of going down that path, just have one system for both buildings. Don't mix it up. Just makes maintenance a nightmare. It also ends up being the least cost. so kind of happy coincidence there.
So you conceivably can see the floor above us that we shut all 4 departments down at that time.
Maybe 2 at a time.
Yeah, you can split that. And again, the phasing is gonna be based on what your requirements are as a,
North south. A lot of the real heavy lifting is on the north end of that upper floor, and south sort of stays as is. So, you know.
Yeah. Again,
We'll
we'll figure out we're getting in the weeds, and those are the kind of details
you'd have to move the treasure.
Well, I'm just thinking about
to do north south. So
I
maybe
guess I was only thinking of moving one department at a time, and not have to essentially close down more now.
All right, and you can do that. I mean,
I'm seeing issues with public.
Will that swamp cooler have to be eliminated all at once?
No, it'll stay until the very end.
Okay, I didn't know if you needed it for space for the units, outdoor units.
Well, the outdoor units, and then there was kind of some debate on that too, whether to go up on the roof or out on grade. You know, Yeah, I mean, we can work around that though. It doesn't need to go back in the same spot.
Well, the biggest advantage you have is heat rises. So if you start on the lower level, at least the winter months, it'll be fairly tolerable in the upper floors.
Yeah.
I said fairly tolerable.
Well, you know what? The thing is, you wouldn't get rid of the boiler until the very end. So people shouldn't, on the floors above, nobody should notice any difference. It should just function the way it functions today. With the exception that you won't have the generator heating.
Yeah.
For officer, so. That should go away pretty soon, you know. Yeah, you know, for a guy like me, for what I do, this is the fun part when you start digging into the weeds and figuring out how to make it all fit together and work in a way that kind of keeps you guys functioning.
Right. That is the interesting, is solving the
It
puzzles
is a
and
big
getting
puzzle.
into.
It's the whole reason they got.
Fun for you.
I was gonna say, I don't find it real interesting, but.
I have lived through an office remodel though,
Oh, I
so,
have to.
yeah.
You got anything else, John?
I don't, we're here to answer questions, whatever we can do.
Anybody have
So-
any questions or anything else?
I personally think doing the HVAC is gonna be great. I'm willing to put up with the yucky parts of that in order to get the benefit of it.
Yeah,
Well, and I think it was said here before, this is gonna be a long process. Everybody's gonna have to be really there.
Yeah, you know what, as we get into the design, as we start having conversations, you know, John starts talking to the different departments and doing the programming. We'll start to kind of take all those things into account and come up with a phase, you know, we'll probably do through a couple of different phasing plans to find something that actually works for you guys. So it's a discovery process. It's not
Yeah.
something you just figure out. This is a complicated project.
Well, that's what I'm thinking, if we close the north, the north end half down of the floor above us here.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking as far as public, and we move, let's say you down here. Then we're gonna have to do something with your department. And where do we do that? Because you have a lot of the public traffic.
Well, I thought you'd go east and west.
you could do east and west.
So you would move the assessor, and then you just do the west half first. Treasurer stays where they're at, the auditor comes down here. And then when the treasurer's done, the treasurer goes
Well,
over.
okay, that would make more sense. Yeah, then you wouldn't have to count traffic, the public traffic. Yeah, right, okay.
I could see this space over here being used quite a bit, the sheriff's office, just,
If we get the treasurer's office already, that should be very little disruption. to the
Yeah.
public. Then you just move over to your new expanded space. While Courtney still stayed down here for both phases. So you'd be down here
Then
for your first phase.
basically, your office would be, the bathrooms are gonna be the biggest part of this.
So here's a helpful way of thinking about it from the HVAC standpoint. So the moving parts and pieces you have is you have a duct coming down from an air handling unit up on the roof for ventilation. So you got a vertical component of that, and then you got the horizontal mains that go out on each floor. And then that's basically, so that's one piece. And you know, as I think through this, you know, there may be a way, we may be able to just find a way of doing a chase independent of the existing chase. Get that main from the roof down right away. And then stub that branch out in each floor. And then all of a sudden you can kind of pick and choose from a phasing standpoint where you go. Because that's kind of the critical piece, because if you can get that piece in, that main, then you don't necessarily then you're not necessarily limited to a linear, you know, basement, ground, first, second. You can start kind of playing with that phasing a little bit. The second component is those VRF units, they don't have big pipes going to them. They have little refrigerant lines. So it's a lot less space, very easy to put in. You know, you don't need a whole ton of space. It's getting those refrigerants, you know, and locating what they call a zone box, which is kind of like a manifold, so to speak, for the refrigerant lines. You put those manifolds on each floor. And then once you get that piped up and once you get the condensing unit set up on the roof for the ground, then you can start bringing branches off to VRFs as you go. So it starts giving you some level of flexibility in terms of how you're phasing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, just kind of thinking about it just for a little bit, it's like, well, there is a way if we do some pre-thinking on this where we can set it up where you really dictate the phasing. You know, now then, you know, the only thing you got to be cautious about is the more phases you add, the more costs you add. So just phasing complicates the construction process, and you want to minimize that as much as possible. So I just wanted to throw that out there so you didn't get hung up on, oh, we got to start on the basement. You know, I mean, which may still be ideal, but as you get into the other floors where there's a lot more complexity in terms of how we deal with the phasing, you have some flexibility in how you can handle that.
Real quick question. So when you're doing it, let's say we start in the basement.
Mhm.
Is there concerns of going over those records and ITs down there? I mean, so that storage room, it's top to bottom full of stuff that I don't even.
There's no ceiling in there right now, if I remember.
Yeah, you know what?
That helps.
Yeah, the type of stuff they're putting in doesn't have liquid in it. So
Okay.
there's stuff there.
I just would be concerned that water would get on all those.
Yeah. No, we're not putting sprinkler piping in. We're not, the only thing you'd be doing is taking out piping, you know, heating water piping.
Well, there are some of those offices on this end that used to be used as offices and now they're used as storage. And I wouldn't think that those places would need ceilings put back in them.
Right.
Exactly, and it would help to
Yeah.
not put ceilings back,
Yeah.
because then in the future, if you wanted to do something different with them.
Yeah, whenever if you decide to use it for something else, then you can design it for that.
Exactly. So this list is the worst you're gonna see it so far, this budget. We're gonna go back.
Enough to throw me over. here.
Yeah, sorry to do that to you. It's the first pill, so to speak, to swallow, but gets better from there. We will start working on how to get those numbers down reasonable.
But am I right that we should try to maybe get this halfway done here? So
I think you want
we
to get,
can move that
yeah,
up, we can be up there till this is done.
we
And
could,
then
yeah,
utilize that space for an office while we're doing the rest of the renovation.
yeah, I think it makes sense. In my mind, this might be one of the first things you really do is finish these
Well, I think we
spaces,
can even start that after they're moved out.
just start demo or whatever.
And as far as the heating, we just leave this. We probably don't do anything with the exterior walls for the time being.
Yeah,
But I guess what I'm looking at, whatever we do, we have it set up so IT only does it once.
right, yeah.
Well, if you do that, then there won't be space down here for people to do that.
Yeah, over here. Like,
Well, this
Yeah.
plan showed you taking the whole space.
yeah, but I think I would put a temporary wall in there for the time being.
I see that.
Just put a temporary wall in there that we can take out later on.
And if you don't need that much room, is what's shown there, we can maybe reorient it so that it goes, the room goes this way. Like you said, Gene, keep the wall or temp wall or what. All that goes into the next phase plan.
And like Dean and I were talking yesterday, if we get to the point and we can have, which the supervisors never had their own dedicated, kind of like cubicles, we could probably utilize that over here eventually if we had to.
I think the new space wall lines up right with that, right there, so. Potentially take some of this out, start getting some of the work done and then expand.
Well,
back.
like I told you, I have no problem moving that wall, but I do not want that to be a real narrow hallway.
No, that
Because
would,
that
yeah,
is
that would
also an
stay,
entrance for the
Yeah.
sheriff to do.
right. That would stay, and I think the hallway would be right at that.
I wouldn't be opposed to running halfway to the door.
Yeah,
Cut the door in. With the one.
it'd have to be redone,
Yeah.
or taken out or whatever.
The other
You'd have a
thing-
doorway coming in from the hallway coming in, you're over there.
Correct.
So how do you tackle the bid process? So I would assume that when you have deliverables on the HVAC, then we can have that to bid. But is the rest of it going to be segmented, like?
I would
this would
say.
be The first phase, this could be phase one, to do this down here and.
I would kind of
Split
lean
it
more
out like
toward,
that?
I mean, you at the end of the day have to kind of at least get to a basic level of design, kind of like I mentioned earlier. We can't really design the HVAC in the vacuum without knowing what's eventually going to go back in some of these places.
What's gonna stay as is, what's gonna be
Yeah.
new, you know?
And so from a bidding process, I'll tell you right now, when you don't want to bid this. So you don't want to bid this in the spring.
Right.
Because when you look at publicly bid projects in Iowa, by going by master builders data, if you look at like I drew a graph of January to December, and as to when most projects are bidding, the peak is going to happen in February, in March, and April, and then starts dropping down. The best time to bid something like this, because it is indoor work, is going to be probably like late in the summer, early in the fall.
So we just missed that window.
Yeah.
Well, I think it'd be designed through winter.
Yeah, this is a pretty lengthy design process. This isn't like something you can whip out in a month. I mean, there's quite a
Especially
bit
with all
of
the
thought that
logistics
goes
and
into this.
discussions and things of that nature.
But we could start this phase probably now, couldn't we?
Well, I think you know, it's one of those things where I think the best way to spend your dollars is not in small pieces. I think it's to do the whole plan, get your whole plan done. And then if you want to bid that out in smaller pieces, if you want to bid,
If we had it.
but you have your whole plan done and you say, just do this first part.
Or bid it and have alternates as your safety valve.
So like, say like bid this whole floor. As a
But
phase.
you have to have a plan.
Well, that's what I mean. though.
Yeah,
you
I
gotta
think
have a
you want,
plan.
I think you want
But I
one
mean-
set of drawings
Yeah.
with the whole project and then
Yeah, yeah,
do this part first, do this part second,
okay, gotcha.
But bid it all as one.
bid it all.
I-
One
I-
contractor bids the whole.
Bid all,
Yeah.
bid it all. as
You're
one.
gonna want, here's one thing you want to
Okay.
avoid, is you
Gotcha.
don't want to have 4 different contractors putting in the system.
One leaving, one coming
Well,
back, one picking
no,
up.
I agree with the heating and cooling. That needs to be one contract.
Right. You don't want to.
But as far as the structural stuff,
I can do one in general.
Oh, like the interior stuff? Yeah, I'm mechanical.
I think.
I do. Well, I'm in electrical, to be honest with you, but I just taught Connie. They were slumming when they hired me.
Sorry, sorry.
I would think that the electrical, you know, I better agree, but whatever.
Well, I think the benefit you get from us is Tom and I both seen this happen. We've seen what works pretty well, what doesn't work very well, where you can run into cost overruns. Also, we don't want to promise you a whole bunch of work that could be done for a small amount of money, and then you find out later that, well, that was wrong, you know. That's where we're coming from. We want to tell you the best reality that we can and get you set up, you know.
So
for
Cedar
success.
Falls is what you use for comparable bids.
Yeah,
So they
that's the
haven't
one.
started any construction there yet.
They just awarded the contract Monday.
So we could drive over there in a couple of months and see what a mess it is.
Yeah. They'll be-
See what we get a look
they'll be
at.
stressed out.
Go take pictures.
The moving is tough on the first day you move, then it's fine for the few months. And then moving back is kind of nice because you're moving into your final
Yeah.
home,
So,
you know.
I used to, this is kind of a little odd story, but I used to own a business when I started my MEP. I've been a consulting engineer for 33 years, but I also had a construction management firm when I first started my own business. We specifically did work for Nationwide and Wells Fargo, and a lot of what we did was phase remodels. And my teams were responsible for basically packing people up, you know, moving them to a different space and resettling them and organizing those moves and stuff. So,
Logistics coordinators.
yeah, you know, so we had move coordinators is what we called them. And you know what? I had a great appreciation for how much planning that took. And when you have somebody, the one thing I would recommend is you get one person. And you can either hire it outside or somebody internally that you make the czar of that process and let them run with it. Because the key to making that thing as painless as possible is just pre-planning it. And if you pre-plan it right and you have all the parts and pieces in there and everybody knows where they're going, everything's labeled, it ends up being a very painless process, relatively speaking.
I can't imagine that moving my entire office into 3 or 4 spaces.
Well, you should have seen the offices we had to move. We had to move like underwriting nationwide. It was like I was gonna say it's about a 400-person department.
Yeah,
And I tell you what, that,
I did that call center, 150 call center seats.
yeah,
I just remember what a nightmare it was when the conduction runs to the hallway on card
Yeah,
tables where they
right.
put the carpet down twice. That was years ago, and that was, I just can imagine moving everything we have now.
It was a nightmare for me to move my desk this way because we had to
They
run.
call that creature pattern.
No, it was all the cable and electrical.
I tell you what, I love that process of planning. That's the reason I taught it. It was always fascinated me in terms of how you plan that stuff out. So fear not, if you approach it logically, there is a good way to find a path. You just have to make sure you
Just look
spend
at
time
it as
doing
being
Yeah.
For one thing, Lisa, when it's,
But that's what I take.
when you move, you're moving into a much larger space.
That'll be your forever home.
Yeah, that's gonna be, you know, that's gonna be the end of it. You move once and you're done. Courtney's got to work.
I told you at the beginning of this, like, whatever made it easier for other people, I would do, and maybe not a problem with that. And I'm not gonna be the one moving it, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's just,
yeah. It's been a long time.
Yeah, IT is probably gonna be.
Well, if you could set up a four or
Computer
five,
bank down here.
4 or 5 desks, 4 or 5 computers, keep the, you know,
Wireless and use
Yeah.
laptop.
and just make it so that the move is moving here temporarily.
look, we have to be able to access to that one.
Yeah.
I think we want people,
That's could be pretty tough.
like,
Oh,
you know what I mean? We gotta be, but I don't think it's just coming up with some computers and.
Yeah.
You know, we did it,
Yes,
Nate.
we are.
We take conference rooms like this, we get these folding tables, we set them up in clusters. And then we bring in, you know, the Cat 6 IT cable and we'd have poles, we bring it down. And then we bring power the same way. And then we would just set up these ad hoc little clusters where
That's what my
people,
office used to be.
yeah, it's just, and it's effective, not for like forever, but you can certainly work there for a few months that way. So there's ways you can do this that it just, I mean, tell you what, you start working on this, I'll consult for free and tell you
I
guys.
was just gonna say, you saved so much. I was
It
just
just,
gonna
it
say,
He did.
just
Great
appears to
idea.
me, this is just a pipe system, heating, cooling, I just can't imagine that being, areas being shut down. a couple months.
It's, when we actually put this exact same system in my building when we remodeled it here 2 years ago. And it's just that you have to keep in mind that it's a kind of a linear process. You got to get the refrigerant piping is, you know, when you put that in, there's a lot of, like you have to purge them, then you have to, and a lot of that soldering and getting all that stuff just put in just right. It's a craftsman working on it. It takes a little bit of time. It's not just something they slap up there. So
So let me ask you this, say when Courtney's moved down here and you're working up above here in the treasurer's and the assessor office. When that is done, is that done?
Yeah.
Is that, we got roof ceiling tiles up and everything like that? Is that done? Because then you just have to connect
right.
to the main power.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And when we design it in such a way, knowing what the phasing is up front, we design it in a way that you wouldn't have to go back into an area to do anything.
Good.
So,
That's helpful there.
yeah.
Anything else? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Contrary, motion carries. Thanks, Rich.
I think this is great.
Everything we've done up till now starts to make a little more sense to what.
Well, we always have more questions.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, it helps prepare us too, because I'm thinking, okay, a day or so, you know, we just close down, we all move out. So,
You'll have,
Yeah,
you'll have a little bit more warning time.
I
would be okay with-
Well, I'll just take vacation for a day. Yeah, you know.
There you go.
Well, I'm thinking about, that's a good idea, but you gotta have access to the public. That's about it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I left that number.
Well, I got that somewhere.
No, I gotta get a proposal
Thank you.
finished, and I gotta We just got a
Yeah.
project